Yeah, I think that's everybody. Type tie in there.
They're called chat bubbles.
So, oh, Cammie's the only person I don't have that's type tie, but she can do that in just a second while we're working. All right, Marley, go ahead and type hi in the comment section, I think, or the chat section, whatever it's called. Good afternoon and welcome to Miss Walker's story time. Today we are continuing with our book, Ban This Book. Go ahead, guys, as you come in, be sure you click the um, mute button on your mics just so that your sounds from your house aren't coming through on the recording. And be sure you type hi in the chat box so that I know who's here, because I get a printout of the chat gets sent to me at the end of each class, so that way I can see who's here, because I am sharing who attends my story times with your teachers, just so that they know and know that you're participating in some way. So I think that's everything. Let me double check and make sure we've got everybody's typed something in the chat box. All right, it looks great. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Feel free, if you want to, you can turn your cameras off or on. That is completely up to you. I do not mind if you have your cameras off. That is completely up to you. All right, so here we go. Ban This Book. We are starting on chapter 24, Helen Comes Again. Remember, Wait Till Helen Comes is the name of one of the books that's on the banned book list. Wait Till Helen Comes sat in the middle of the cafeteria floor where everyone could see it. Colleen Farmer had been carrying it in secret under his tray when he ran into Orlando Cho, who was horsing around with Steve Rawlez. Colette was a white second grader with sandy brown hair that laid flat on his head, like a Roman general from my history book. He was currently obsessed with rock collecting, and when his tray went flying and sent mac and cheese, chocolate milk, and a dozen minerals of various shapes, sizes, and colors splattering across the floor, along with Wait Till Helen Comes. The kids in the cafeterias were still clapping and cheering at him, but I could barely see them or notice the splattered food and the scattered rocks. Even the gross, wet rag smell of the tables went away. The only thing in the room for me at the moment was the book, laying in the middle in the open like a spotlight was on it. All right, that's enough, said Principal Banzetti to everyone. Principal Banzetti, let me help you, she told Colette as she bent over to pick up the book. 5 seconds, Principal Banzetti was going to pick up the prosecution exhibit A in the case of the Wake County School Board against Amy Ann Olander. And there wasn't a thing I could do about it but sit and watch. That's my seat, someone yelled across the room. I was sitting there. Sit on this, someone yelled. Two boys tumbled on the floor, kicking and pulling and punching. As quickly as they cheered for Colette, the students in the cafeteria started chanting, fight, fight, fight. I couldn't see who it was. There was a tangle of arms and legs before kids fell into a circle around them. Principal Banzetti stood up, handed the book to Colette even without looking at it, and ran for the fight. Break it up, she cried. I hurried over to Colette, and he was picking up his empty milk carton and pretending to drink it. That was refreshing. Go hide that in your locker, I whispered to him. He looked at the chocolate milk carton. What's this? No, the book. He looked at the book in his hand. His eyes went wide and understood. Oh, gosh, sorry, he said. Just hurry, I told him. Don't bring it in to read in the cafeteria again. Colette hurried off. I went back to my seat and put my head on my table. That had been close. Colette would have gotten in trouble, and then he would have to tell them where he got the book. Walker Library was going great. Meant that there were lots of banned books out there in the hands of Shelbourne elementary students. It was only a matter of time until another one of them slipped up and got caught with the book. Danny and Rebecca sat down next to me as the teachers sent everyone back to their seat. Was that Wait Till Helen Comes? Rebecca asked. Yes, and Principal Banzowitzki had it in her hands. Lucky thing there was a fight, Danny said as he combed his hair away from his eyes. Anybody see who it was? We all got the answer at the same time. The crowd cleared, and Principal Bowetsky and Mrs. Green each emerged with a different boy in hand. One of them I'd seen in the fourth grade hall but didn't know. The other was Jeffrey Gonzalez. That was my seat, Jeffrey yelled and lunged for the boy again. Principal Bowinsky held him back. That's enough, said Principal Bowinsky. Let's all go to my office. This time there were no fake oohing from students. This was a real big time trouble, and they knew it. As soon as they were gone, the cafeteria exploded with excited chatter, everyone revealing every detail of the fight. As bad as it was for Jeffrey, it had been a lucky thing that the fight had started when it did. Or maybe it wasn't lucky. Maybe Jeffrey had seen the book on the floor and started the fight as a distraction. But did Jeffrey even know about the BVLL? He hadn't. He hadn't that day we walked to the office together. If he'd done it on purpose, it was quick thinking, and if he hadn't, it was perfect timing for me. Either way, Jeffrey was going to be in big trouble, and either way, I owed him a big thank you. Chapter 25, What's in a Name? I couldn't thank Jeffrey Gonzalez the next day because he got suspended for fighting. Jeffrey was the first kid everyone could remember getting suspended for anything at Shelbourne Elementary. I hated the way people were whispering about him in the halls in the cafeteria, like they enjoyed that somebody had gotten into big trouble, like Jeffrey was some kind of awful criminal. Space Cadet was a geek, but he was a really nice guy. At least he always had been. So, I've been thinking about our visibility problem, Danny said. I hadn't seen him come to the desk next to me and Rebecca. Our visibility problem, Rebecca said, as in the books are being visible when everybody drops one in the cafeteria. I interpreted exactamundo. Danny flicked his hair back, and I've got an idea, but it may require adding a new board member. Who? I asked. Let's get passes to the computer lab and I'll introduce you. The computer lab had enough computers and printers for the entire class to use, but it was usually open for kids with passes unless a teacher had reserved it. Mr. Deacon checked our passes, and Danny led us to the back corner where another kid was sitting. I'd never seen him before, which made me think he wasn't a fourth grader, but he looked like a fourth grader, maybe even a third grader. He was short and stick thin. His skin was dark black as mine and had thick curly hair, short on the sides, but very tall in the middle, like a mushroom. He peered up at us from round gold rimmed glasses. Danny had a secret handshake with him. Ladies, may I introduce MJ, aka Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, I asked. You mean as in the basketball player? MJ slumped. Yes. He hates his name because he can't play basketball, Danny said. At all, MJ said. Danny took a seat beside him. And he's the shortest kid in fifth grade. Fifth grade? I thought he might be a third grader. Second shortest, MJ said. People in wheelchairs don't count in height competitions, Danny told him. MJ looked lasers at him. Man, do you want my help or not? Yes, 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 said Danny. He flicked his hair back and motioned us to sit. What I didn't tell you about MJ is he's the best computer artist in the whole world. MJ looked pleased to hear that. Show him what you got, MJ. MJ called up a file on the computer. It was the cover of Lightning Thief. I'd never seen it before, with Percy facing off against a massive monitor, monitor, which he fights in the first time when he goes to Camp Half Blood. It was a great cover. What this? I asked. A foreign edition? No, man. This is the MJ edition. You drew this? Said Rebecca. Yeah, on the computer, MJ said. Didn't I tell you he was the best? Said Danny. How does this help? Rebecca asked. Well, we'll get MJ to make fake covers we can put on all the books. Danny flicked his hair out of his eyes. Got one? See, now, anybody who drops the book in the cafeteria, Principal Blavatsky picks up and she sees another book. You'll do what I ask? Make fake covers for our books? Yeah, MJ said, but it won't work to have the same cover on all of them. How many books are we talking about? 27, I told him. And more coming, I hope. MJ whistled. I better get started. I'm going to need some titles. Real ones? Danny asked. We better not. If I realized that wasn't a real cover of Lightning Thief, the teacher might too. We need some fake titles. I'm all ears. Right now, Rebecca said, you want covers? I need titles. How do you come up with a book title? How do authors come up with book titles? I never thought about it. Book titles always had something to do with what was inside. How could we make up book titles for our books that weren't real? Danny closed his hair and with his fingers again smiled. The boy who fell in love with his hair, I said. MJ cackled and started typing. Hey, that's not funny, Danny said as he flicked his hair when he realized what he was doing and blushed. Here's one for you, hair sucker. I think. I didn't know anybody noticed me chewing on my braid. Naturally curly, Rebecca said, pretending to pimp her black curly hair. MJ said, all right. They can't all be about hair. And we can't say sucker either, or they'll ban that too, Rebecca said. All right. The girl who only loved books, Danny said. MJ nodded. I like that. I like that. Keep him coming. Jessica Rogers, girl lawyer, Rebecca said. I shook my head. Too close to something else. Really? What? I shook my head to let her know she didn't want to read it. The Mystery of the Blue Pirate, I said. The 17th Princess. Wet dog smell. Mr. Bear opens a bank account. I think I can see my house from here. They were already dead. Smell my finger. Tales of the fourth grade zombie. Robert, robot super ninja. No, robot ninja. No, super ninja robot man. Danny, it doesn't matter. It's not a real book. I want it to sound good. We went back and forth laughing as we came up with titles. MJ was typing all the time. We were having so much fun, Mr. Deacon had to tell us to hold it down. I popped up from behind the computer to signal him we would be quiet, and I saw someone in the next rows of the computer staring back at me. Trey McBride. He waved at me with one hand. His other hand was on the lid of his scanner, and the light glided back and forth. He opened it and took his sketchbook out and flipped over to scan another page. I dropped behind the row of computer where the three of us were swallowing laughter hard to try to keep from crying. Guys, we have to hold it down. Rebecca nodded, tears rolling down her face, and Danny let something out something like a honk. I'm serious. Trey's in the next row. He's probably overheard everything. That got Rebecca and Danny's attention. They stopped laughing and peeked over the row. Who's Trey? MJ asked. The son of the lady who banned all these books, I told him. But was that all he was, her son, or was he her spy too? All right, I need more titles, MJ said. I've got one, I said. How about Friend or Foe? Chapter 26. Tra-la-la-la. I bounced over the door where Rebecca and Danny were already in line. Today was the day of the Dave Pilkey author visit. I didn't really like his books, but I'd never met a real like author before. I also had a book of his I'd bought for the BBLL tucked away under my shirt. I wanted to get it autographed. Mr. Vaughn led us to the cafeteria where we sat in a big half circle with the rest of fourth grade. Mrs. Jones stood in the middle of the circle with a projector cart with the man I guessed was Mr. Pilkey. He was a white, medium sized, and not too old, with short brown hair and a flowery Hawaiian shirt. He smiled at something Mrs. Jones said to him and then called for our attention. You guys know that Dave Pilkey's also the guy that wrote the Dogman series. Just an FYI there. All right, fourth graders. I'm very pleased to introduce you to an author whose books many of you have read and enjoyed. I know I have. Dave Pilkey, Mrs. Jones said his name, like Dave, even though it was spelled Dave, is also the name author of more than 50 books, most of which he also illustrated, including The Dumb Bunnies, Ricky Rashoda, and of course, Captain Underpants. He's also the Caldecott Honor for The Paperboy and a number of Reader Choice Awards around the country. That last part, Mrs. Jones said after Principal Borwinski came into the room to stand by the door, I noticed. I'm sure Mr. Pilkey will tell you lots more about his life and his books. I'll turn things over to him. Let's give a big Shelbourne Elementary welcome to Mr. Dave Pilkey, she said. Everyone cheered, mostly for the sake of being able to clap and yell at school, but I cheered because I was really happy he was there. Mr. Pilkey showed slides of things he had drawn when he was a kid and told us how he was getting in trouble at school and getting sent down the hall to sit by himself. I glanced over at Principal Bowitzki. When he said that, she didn't look too happy. The kids around me were loving it. Mr. Pilkey was funny. Everybody was laughing. Then Mr. Pilkey talked about how he drew his first comics and how they weren't spelled right and didn't look as good as he could draw now, and how none of that mattered because they were lots of fun and made his friends laugh. You didn't have to spell well or be a great grammar to be a writer, he told us, and you don't have to draw perfectly to be an artist. Then he gave examples of some famous artists who broke the rules and painted houses upside down and famous writers who didn't use the right spelling or grammar. Some of the teachers didn't like that much either. But it wasn't until Mr. Pilkey was in college that a teacher saw his drawings and told him he should be writing a drawing for kids. And that was how he became a kid's author. He finished his talk and showed us how to draw a picture of Captain Underpants and asked if we had any questions. I put my hand up, and so did a lot of other kids. The questions were dumb, like, did you write all those books? How much money did you make? Where did you get the ideas? I like to draw comments too, which wasn't even a question. Do you know any famous authors? Can you draw Batman? And then he called on me. My heart was racing, and I asked, what do you think about your books being banned from our library? The room got very quiet. I tried hard not to look at Principal Bowitzki. Mr. Pilkey smiled. Well, I wish they were on the shelves where everybody could read them, he said. I think it's important that libraries be a place you can find all kinds of books, good ones, bad ones, funny ones, serious ones. Every person should be free to read whatever they want, and not have to explain it to anybody why they like it or why they think it's valuable. I hope you all get a chance to read my book someday. I smiled, my heart still thudding, its loudest in my chest as I thought everyone else could hear it. The copy of Captain Underpants I'd brought for the author's visit was going to be checked out forever. I looked over at Principal Bornsky again. She had her arms folded and was glaring, but not at Mr. Pilkey and not at me. She was glaring at Mrs. Jones. People asked more questions, mostly dumb ones. And then Mrs. Jones said we were out of time. Everybody cheered again to thank Mr. Pilkey for being there, and the teacher started dismissing us class by class. Mr. Vaughn, can I go and meet the author? I begged. Come right back when you're finished, he said. I grabbed Rebecca and Danny without asking if they could come too and hurried across the room where Mrs. Jones stood with Mr. Pilkey. Mrs. Jones hugged me while we waited for a couple of kids from another class to be done showing their comments to Mr. Pilkey. My little rebel, Mrs. Jones said to me. Rebel, me? The two boys who had drawn the comics were finally called away by their teacher, and we got to say hello. That's when I realized I couldn't say anything to him about the BBLL, not with Mrs. Jones standing there, and that's all I'd come to talk about. Rebecca and Danny and I stood there smiling at him for a long time, and he smiled back, waiting for us to say something. But after a while, his smile began to falter. Do any of you guys draw? Mr. Pilkey asked. We shook our heads. Do you like to write? We shook our heads. Mr. Pilkey laughed. Well, do you like to read at least, I hope? Oh, yeah, you have no idea. A student tripped over a cord to the projector chart, and Mrs. Jones hurried away to take care of it. Finally, I looked around to make sure no one else was watching, and I pulled the Captain Underpants book out from underneath my shirt. Will you sign this? I asked Mr. Pilkey. He looked surprised. He took the book from me, even more surprised when he saw the cover. Smell my finger, he said. The cover had a picture of a kid with a sticky finger and the other kid pressed to the ground beside him. That's just on the outside, Mr. Pilkey. I opened the book to show him the inside, The Adventures of Captain Underpants. Oh, he said. He flipped through it and found the envelope, and I'd pasted to the back of the checkout card. Oh, he said, and then looked at the cover. Who did this art? Our friend MJ, he's in fifth grade, Danny said. Tell him I said it's great. I should write a real book called Smell My Finger. He looked around to see if anybody was looking. So I'm guessing your teachers don't know about this. We shook our heads. I see. He took a Sharpie from his pocket and opened the book to the front page. Anybody in particular I should make it out to? The BBLL, Danny said. The BBLL? He asked, then he wrote in the book, too, the BBLL, and drew a quick sketch of Captain Underpants saying, tra-la, under his signature. Do I want to know what the BBL stands for? He asked. I stuffed the book under my shirt. Probably not. All right, well, keep reading, you guys, and don't get into too much trouble. Mrs. Jones had come back. Mr. Pilkey, if you're done with those three, I have one more student I want you to meet. I almost squeaked. Mrs. Joe had brought Trey McBride to see the author. Why? I sucked in my stomach, praying he didn't see the book under my shirt. We have to get back to class, I said, and I grabbed Rebecca and Danny and ran off so Mr. Pilkey barely had time to call out bye to us. Chapter 27, A Present. The Adventures of Captain Underpants never made it to the banned book library locker. It was checked out before I even got to class, and it stayed checked out with a waiting list. I was going to have to save up and buy the rest of them now. I might even have to read them myself. That afternoon, from my spot in the corner of the library, I watched Mrs. Jones thank Mr. Pilkey and helped him get ready to go. He told her had a great time and thanked her for fighting the good fight. He spotted me watching from the corner, and I ducked behind the London Eye Mystery. That's a book. I peered out, and he pulled something from his bag and whispered something to Mrs. Jones. She looked back at me in a curious expression on her face. Mr. Pilkey's ride to the airport arrived, and he and Mrs. Jones shook hands and said goodbye. When he was gone, Mrs. Jones called me up to the front desk. Mr. Pilkey was very impressed by you, Amy Ann, Mrs. Jones told me. She had the same curious expression on her face, like she was trying to figure something out. In fact, he left you a present. A present? Mr. Jones looked around the same way I had in the cafeteria to make no one was watching, and then brought a boxed set from underneath her desk. It was every single Captain Underpants book there was, all 12 books. For me, I said. Mrs. Jones watched me closely. He said you'd know what to do with them. I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. This was the biggest single donation in the history of the banned books locker library. I do, I said. I scooped them up. Amy Ann, Mrs. Jones said, you know not to show these around school, right? I nodded, already thinking about how to get in touch with MJ as soon as possible. We were going to need more fake covers. And we will stop right there this afternoon, guys, and start on chapter 28 on Monday. So you all should have a great rest of your Friday afternoon. Um, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Remember, we don't have school tomorrow, so you have the rest of the week